Korean Mafia boss's 7-year-old girl followed black delivery woman home. When her father watched the GPS, he cried. A 7-year-old girl slipped out of a black SUV worth more than most people's houses, and she followed a complete stranger home. Not because she was lost, not because she was scared, but because of something she saw that her father, a man who had stared down loaded guns without flinching, could not watch without breaking down completely. If you've never subscribed to this channel, do it right now, because the story you're about to hear will stay with you for a very long time. Her name was Soo-ah. 7 years old, pigtails, gap-toothed smile, the kind of kid who collected stray cats and kept a journal full of drawings of people she called her heart friends. She had no idea what her father did for a living. She knew he had lots of meetings. She knew men in black suits called him sir, and looked at the floor when they talked to him. She knew their house had more rooms than she could count, and that there was always food, always warmth, always security guards at the front gate. What she did not know was that her father, Kang Jin-ho, ran one of the most feared criminal organizations in Seoul. What she did not know was that the word his enemies whispered when they thought no one was listening was a word that translated roughly to the ghost who never forgives. What she did not know was that her father had spent the last 20 years building a world from blood and silence, and that the only soft thing left inside him was her. And what she absolutely could not have known, what none of them could have known, was that one Saturday afternoon in late November, a delivery woman named Amara would change everything. Let's go back to the beginning, because this story has layers, and if you miss any of them, you'll miss the whole point. Kang Jin-ho was not born into power, he was born into nothing. A cramped apartment in the Mapo district of Seoul, a mother who worked double shifts at a textile factory, a father who left when Jin-ho was 4 and never looked back. He grew up watching his mother count coins on the kitchen table every night, lips moving silently, the same tired mathematics of survival. He learned early that the world did not care about you unless you made it care. He learned that lesson the hard way. On the streets, in back alleys, through a progression of choices that each one seemed small and reasonable and necessary in the moment, but which stacked up over years into something enormous and irreversible. By 30, he ran distribution networks across 3 districts. By 35, he had interests in construction, nightlife, loan operations, and import businesses that existed on paper but served other purposes entirely. By 40, he sat at the top of a structure that no law enforcement agency had ever been able to fully map, because Jin-ho was meticulous, methodical, and, this was the thing people always underestimated, genuinely intelligent in ways that formal education had never had the chance to develop. He had one weakness, just one, and her name was Soo-ah. Her mother had died when Soo-ah was 2. A car accident on the Incheon Expressway, rain-slicked road, a truck that drifted lanes. Clean, sudden, no one's fault, no one to punish. Which was the part that drove Jin-ho half-mad with grief, because for the first time in his adult life, he was confronted with pain that had no solution. There was no one to call, no debt to collect, no arrangement to make. Just loss, pure and absolute, and a 2-year-old daughter who kept reaching toward the door when she heard sounds in the hallway. From that day forward, Soo-ah became the architecture around which Jin-ho rebuilt himself. Not the criminal version of himself. That engine kept running, because it had to, because stopping it would have been more dangerous than maintaining it. But the human version, the version that still existed somewhere underneath. He hired a full-time nanny. He attended every school event he could, slipping in at the back in a plain dark coat, nodding at nothing, watching his daughter perform in the winter recital with an expression on his face that his lieutenants, had they seen it, would not have recognized. He read to her every night he was home. He taught her to ride a bike in the underground parking garage at 2 in the morning because the schedule didn't allow for afternoons. He kept her life as normal as a man like him could manage, which meant she attended a prestigious private school, had ballet lessons on Thursdays, and received approximately 4 times the recommended daily intake of genuine fatherly affection from a man who showed it to nobody else on earth. She was, in every sense that mattered, the only real thing he had left. Now, the delivery woman. Amara Ose was 32 years old. Nigerian Korean by way of a complicated family history that she'd long since made peace with. Her father had come to Korea as a graduate student in the early 90s, met her mother at a library in Sinchon, stayed. Amara grew up in Incheon, spoke Korean as her first language, English as her second, and a handful of Igbo phrases that her grandmother had insisted on teaching her over video calls every Sunday. She had a degree in logistics management from Inha University that she was not currently using because the logistics company she'd worked for had downsized 8 months ago and the job market had not been kind since, so she delivered packages. She drove a beat-up white van with a heater that worked inconsistently and a GPS mount held on with 2 rubber bands and a prayer. She worked 6 days a week, started at 6 in the morning, and averaged somewhere between 80 and 100 stops a day depending on the route. She was efficient. She was pleasant. She smiled at people who didn't smile back, and she didn't take it personally, because she was, at her core, a person who had decided, consciously, deliberately, at some point in her mid-20s, after a series of events that had tested her considerably, to be soft in a world that rewarded hardness. She was also, on this particular Saturday in November, running behind schedule. Her last stop of the day was a residential delivery in a neighborhood that sat at the boundary between the old city and the new money. Wide streets, tall hedges, the kind of silence that only exists where people can afford to purchase it. The address sent her to a side street she'd never been to before. She parked. It pulled the package, a large box, moderately heavy, sealed and plain, from the back of the van, and walked up to the gate. The gate was impressive. Black iron, security camera mounted at the corner, an intercom panel on the left. She pressed the button. Nothing. She pressed it again. The camera above her shifted slightly. Someone was looking. She held up the package toward the camera, the way you do. The universal gesture of harmless delivery person with box. Still nothing. She waited. The November air was sharp, and she hadn't brought a proper coat because the van's heater had been working that morning and she'd miscalculated. She stamped her feet softly. Then the gate made a sound. Not the buzz of it opening, but a different sound. And she looked down to find a small face peering at her through the iron bars at knee height. And the child was tiny and bright-eyed, and wearing a coat that probably cost more than Amara's rent. She had pigtails, slightly crooked, like she'd done them herself. She was studying Amara with an expression of total, unguarded fascination. "Hello," Amara said. "Hello," the child said back, in Korean. "You have a big box." "I do. Is there an adult home I can give it to?" The child considered this. "My dad's on the phone. He's always on the phone." She said it with the particular world weariness of small children who have accepted certain facts about their parents. "What's your name?" "Amara, what's yours?" "Su-ah. Why is your skin like that?" Amara had been asked this question in various forms for 32 years, and had long since developed a response that was gentle and complete, and closed the subject without embarrassment. "My dad is from Nigeria," she said. "So I look a little different from most people here. It's just how I am." Sua nodded slowly. Not satisfied exactly. More like she was filing the information carefully. "I think you're very pretty," she said. Then, as if this were a perfectly logical next step. "Do you want to see my cat?" "I need to deliver this package first. I'll go get someone." And she disappeared. It took another 4 minutes, but eventually a man appeared. Not Kang Jin-ho, but one of his security staff, a broad, expressionless man who signed the electronic clipboard, took the package, and closed the gate without a word. Standard. Amara was already walking back to her van, already calculating whether she had time to stop for ramyeon before the kitchen closed, when she heard the small gate-level voice again. "Amara, wait!" She turned. Sua had squeezed back to the bars. She was holding something through the gap. A small tangerine, the kind you buy in big mesh bags at the supermarket. "For you," Sua said. "Because you were standing in the cold." Amara looked at this small person holding out this small fruit with the absolute seriousness of someone presenting a meaningful gift, and something moved in her chest that she couldn't have named precisely. She took the tangerine. She said, "Thank you." She meant it. She drove away, and that, she thought, was that. It was not that. Because Sua had watched the van all the way down the street, and Sua had a memory like a steel trap. And Sua, as her father would have recognized immediately if he'd been paying attention, had her mother's habit of deciding, quickly and finally, that certain people mattered. 3 weeks passed. Jinho's world during those 3 weeks was complicated in ways that had nothing to do with deliveries or small acts of kindness at Iron Gates. There was a dispute with a rival network operating out of the Dongdaemun district. Not violence? Not yet. But the kind of careful maneuvering that requires constant attention, constant communication, constant pressure applied in exactly the right places. There were 2 city council members who required managing. There was a financial audit of one of his legitimate holding companies that was getting uncomfortably close to certain structures. He'd rather remained invisible. He was, in short, distracted. His nanny, a steady, capable woman in her 50s named Mrs. Shin, managed Sua's daily life with practiced ease. School, ballet, homework, dinner, bath, bed. Jinho checked in at night when he could, read the bedtime story when he was home, asked the right questions. Everything appeared normal. What he did not know was that Sua had started paying close attention to the delivery vans on their street. She'd asked Mrs. Shin who the package had been for. Mrs. Shin said it was one of her father's business things. Sua accepted this. She asked if the delivery lady would come back. Mrs. Shin said she didn't know. Sua said the delivery lady had been standing in the cold, and no one had answered the door fast enough, and that was not polite. Mrs. Shin agreed that it was not very polite. Sua went quiet in the way she went quiet when she was thinking hard about something. 2 weeks later, Jinho had a security alert. Not a serious one. A tracker activation on one of the secondary vehicles, which shouldn't have been moving. His head of security, a lean, careful man named Park Dae-won, flagged it immediately. Jinho looked at the screen. The moving dot was not the secondary vehicle. The moving dot was his daughter. His daughter, who was supposed to be at ballet. His heart, which had survived 20 years of criminal enterprise without irregular rhythms, lurched. He called Mrs. Shin. She picked up on the first ring, voice already tight. "Sir, I'm so sorry. I was in the bathroom for 3 minutes and she must have... the front door. Where is she going?" He was already moving, already gesturing for Dae-won, already pulling on his jacket. "I don't know, sir, He looked at the tracker. The dot was moving steadily, purposefully, on foot, through the residential streets, heading. He traced the path, heading toward the main road. Not erratically, not panicked, moving like someone who knew exactly where they were going. "Get in the car," he said to Dae-won, and did not wait for a response. Now here is where the story shifts, because what Jinho was imagining during the 9-minute drive, the things flooding his mind, the scenarios, the threats, the 1,000 ways a man in his position's child could be used against him, none of it was what was actually happening. What was actually happening was this. Sua had recognized Amara's white van. She had seen it turn onto a street 2 blocks from their house, making what must have been a different delivery route. She had been watching from the front room window, a habit she'd developed since that Saturday. And the moment she recognized the dented left bumper and the yellow sticker on the rear door that said something she couldn't quite read, she had made a decision with the total confidence of a 7-year-old who has decided she knows what needs to happen. She had put on her shoes, her coat. She remembered the coat because Amara had been cold, taken the emergency key from the ceramic bowl by the door, let herself out, and followed the van. She wasn't scared. She knew this neighborhood. She'd walked these streets with Mrs. Shin 100 times. She was not running into danger. She was doing something kind. She had, inside her coat pocket, a small package that she had prepared herself and wrapped in pink paper. A hand warmer. One of the long-lasting ones her father kept in a drawer for winter, and a card she had made that said, "For cold days," in her careful, slightly uneven 7-year-old handwriting. She found the van parked on a side street, rear doors open, Amara making her way back from a nearby building carrying an electronic clipboard. Amara saw the small figure standing on the pavement and stopped walking. "Sua," she said, in the careful tone of an adult realizing something has gone somewhat off script. How did you get here? Are you alone? I followed your van, Sua said, matter of fact. I recognized the bumper. I made you something. She held out the pink package. Amara stood very still for a moment, doing the mental arithmetic of the situation. Does anyone know where you are? Sua's expression flickered, and the question had not occurred to her as a problem until this moment. I left a note, she said. This was not true. It became true in her mind as she said it. Okay, Amara said gently. We need to call someone right now. Can you tell me your dad's number? I know it by heart, Sua said, and recited it immediately. Amara dialed. The phone rang once. Who is this? It was not a question. The voice on the other end was the kind of voice that had not been uncertain about anything in a very long time. My name is Amara Osei, she said, keeping her voice steady. I'm a delivery driver. I have your daughter with me. She's safe. She followed my delivery van. I'm on Hangju Row, the side street off the main road, next to the convenience store with the green sign. I will stay here until you arrive. Silence on the line. 3 seconds of absolute silence. Don't move, he said. She didn't move. Sua sat on the back bumper of the van and explained, at some length, the logic of what she'd done. She had wanted to give Amara the hand warmer before winter got worse. She had seen the van. It had seemed like a sign. She had gone. Amara listened to all of this with a patience that Sua would later remember and describe in her journal as the kind of listening where someone really hears you. The black car arrived in under 5 minutes. Kang Jin-ho got out before it fully stopped. He was tall, dark-coated, the kind of man who moved through space as if it arranged itself around him. Daewon stayed by the car. Jin-ho walked directly to his daughter, crouched in front of her, took her small face in both his hands, and looked at her for a long moment without speaking. Sua, for the first time, seemed to understand that she might be in a degree of trouble. I'm fine, Appa, she said. I can see that, he said. His voice was different from the one he'd used on the phone. Quieter. We'll talk about this at home. Then he stood and turned to Amara. She had been watching this reunion from a careful distance, the pink package still in her hands. Sua had handed it back to her during the wait, insisting she open it when she had cold hands. Amara was not frightened, exactly, but she was paying close attention. She had spent her life reading rooms, reading people, and the room currently was a man who had just had 9 minutes of what was clearly terrifying uncertainty about his child's safety. Eek, and who was now standing in front of the person his child had wandered after. Thank you, he said. 2 words, but the weight in them was not normal. The weight in them was the weight of a man who rarely had to be grateful to strangers and who was encountering the sensation like a wall he hadn't expected to be there. She was fine, Amara said. She's a good kid. She is. He looked at the package in Amara's hand. What is that? She made it for me. Hand warmer and a card, because I was standing outside your gate in the cold a few weeks ago. Amara smiled slightly. She was worried about me. Something crossed his face. She couldn't name it precisely. It was there for less than a second, and then it was gone, filed back behind whatever expression he used for the world. Your number, he said. Can I have it? She blinked. Sorry? To compensate you for the disruption, and to know who to thank properly. He said it with a formality that was not quite corporate but had that texture. She gave him her number. He nodded. He picked up Sua, who went to him easily, still clutching the pink paper, and walked back to the car. Daewon opened the door. Before he got in, Jin-ho turned back. She talks about you, he said. My daughter, since the gate. She said the delivery lady was kind. He got in the car. The car left. Amara stood on the pavement holding a hand warmer and a card that said, "For cold days," and tried to figure out what exactly had just happened. She drove home. She ate dinner. She went to bed. At 11:15, her phone rang from an unknown number. I hope it's not too late, said the voice she recognized. It's okay, she said, sitting up. Sua gave me a lecture in the car, he said. There was something in his voice that might, in a different person, have been called sheepish. About how I should have answered the gate faster that day, and she shouldn't have had to give you a tangerine because we should have offered you tea. Amara laughed before she could stop herself. She's 7. She has opinions, he said. Strong ones. She gets it from her mother. The sentence ended with a slight change in texture. She noticed it and didn't press it. Thank you for calling her, she said. When I found her, it would have been bad if she'd been out there alone longer. I watched the GPS in the car, he said, while we were driving. 9 minutes of watching that dot move. He paused. I haven't cried in a long time, but watching that dot, not knowing. Another pause. I wanted you to know what you did today mattered. Amara was quiet for a moment. She gave me a tangerine through an iron gate, she said. In the cold. Because she was worried about a stranger. You raised a kid like that. That's not nothing. He didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice had changed in a way she couldn't fully characterize. I'll have someone send you something. For the trouble. You don't have to. I know, but I will. Then. Good night, Ms. Osei. Good night, she said. She put the phone down and sat in the dark for a while, thinking. Now here is where the story becomes something different from what it appeared to be, because Kang Jin-ho was not the kind of man who called strangers at 11 at night to report on lectures from his daughter. He was not the kind of man who explained what a GPS tracking moment had made him feel. He ran on calculation, on control, on the careful management of every variable in his environment. He had not gotten where he was by making unnecessary calls. He had made this one because something about the afternoon had unsettled him in a way he couldn't immediately categorize, and he needed to. He needed to understand the variable. So he did what he always did when he needed to understand something. He gathered information. By the following morning, he knew most of Amara Osei's biographical outline. 32. Inha University. Logistics. Formerly employed at CJ Logistics, laid off 8 months prior. Currently contracted through a delivery platform, living in a one-room apartment in Yeonsu District, Incheon. No criminal record. No notable associations. The kind of profile that was so clean it should have been boring. It wasn't boring to him. He sent her a food delivery, not a simple one. A full meal from a restaurant he used for important guests, proper traditional Korean food in good containers, with a handwritten note that said only, from Sua's father, thank you again. No name, no number. Just that. Amara received it on her doorstep the next morning before her shift. She stood in her doorway looking at it for a moment, and then she laughed, and then she sent a text to the number that had called her the night before. Received. You didn't have to. It's beautiful. Thank you. He read the text in his office. He put the phone face down on his desk and sat with it for a moment in a way he didn't usually sit with things. Then he called Daewon in and had him update the threat assessment briefing for the ongoing Dongdaemun situation because there was work to do. But the text stayed in his mind all day. 3 days later, Sua asked Mrs. Shin if she could write Amara a letter. Mrs. Shin, who had been looking after Sua long enough to know that certain ideas were better supported than redirected, said yes. Sua spent 40 minutes on the letter. It was 3 pages long. It covered the hand warmer, which Amara had used at work, Sua hoped. The cat, who was named Biscuit, and had eaten Mrs. Shin's reading glasses once. The question of whether Nigeria was warm all the time, a recommendation that Amara wear 2 pairs of socks, and a closing paragraph that said, with a seriousness that made Mrs. Shin's expression do something complicated. I don't have a mom, so I think about people who are nice. I think you are a heart friend. Mrs. Shin photographed the letter and, after a moment of internal debate that she would never discuss with anyone, texted it to Kang Jin-ho. He read it in the back of a car on the way to a meeting that required his full attention. He did not cry. He had not cried in a very long time, as he had told Amara. But the thing that happened to his face and chest reading those 3 pages was something in the same family, something from the same root, and he sat with it in silence for a long time. He was still thinking about it when the meeting started, which meant the meeting was not his best work. Daewon noticed. Daewon noticed everything. He said nothing. Now, Here is the twist. Each of the one you haven't seen coming. Because while all of this was unfolding, the letter, the calls, the food delivery, the GPS, and the crying and the tangerine through the bars, there was something else happening. Something that had nothing to do with kindness and everything to do with the world Jinho actually lived in. The Dongdaemun situation was not resolving. It was escalating. And the people on the other side of it had begun, carefully and precisely, gathering information about Jinho's vulnerabilities. Standard practice. He would have done the same. And the most significant vulnerability in Kang Jinho's profile had always been, perfectly obvious, the child. Daewon brought him the intercept on a Thursday morning, printed on plain paper, no header, handed over with an expression that was professionally neutral. Jinho read it once. He read it again. The opposition had been watching the street. They had been watching the gate. They had documented, among other things, the episode with the delivery van. They had photographs of Suah on the pavement talking to the delivery driver. They had documentation of his personal call that night. They had, in short, identified Amara Osei as a potential pressure point, not because she was guilty of anything, but because Suah was attached to her, and Jinho was attached to Suah, and that was enough. He sat with this for a long time. Here is the thing about Jinho that made him different from the simple version of what he was. He was capable of genuine moral accounting. Not often, but when it mattered. He could sit in front of a situation and ask, plainly, what is the right thing here? And what does it cost me? The obvious move was to cut contact, neutralize the variable, explain to Suah in age-appropriate terms that the delivery lady had moved away. Simple. Safe. The world he operated in required exactly this kind of triage. He picked up the photograph of Suah on the pavement, gap-toothed smile, pigtails, holding out a pink-wrapped package to a stranger she'd decided mattered. He put the photograph down. He called Daewon back in. I want full coverage on Ms. Osei, he said. Not intrusive. She doesn't know it's there, but nobody gets near her. Daewon's expression remained professionally neutral. Understood. And the Dongdaemun matter. Accelerate the timeline. I want it resolved before the end of the month. That's... Daewon hesitated. Aggressive. Yes, Jinho said. It is. He did not explain further. What he had decided, sitting with that photograph, was this. He was not going to let his world reach into the life of a woman who had stood in the cold outside his gate and been given a tangerine by his daughter. He was not going to let the machinery he'd built, the choices he'd made, the gravity of his own history, pull someone innocent into the debris field. He had let that happen before, in the early years, and the memory of it sat in him like a splinter that never quite worked its way out. He was not going to do it again, so he moved fast, faster than the opposition expected. The Dongdaemun situation was resolved, not through violence, which would have been loud and complicated, but through the kind of financial and informational pressure that Jinho was genuinely masterful at applying, accounts frozen, arrangements exposed, loyalties realigned. By the 22nd of the month, 12 days ahead of his stated deadline, the threat had collapsed inward on itself. The photographs of Suah on the pavement and of Amara standing beside her delivery van became irrelevant. Daewon delivered the confirmation on a Tuesday morning and said, with the absolute minimum of expression, "The matter is closed." Jinho nodded. "Remove the coverage on Ms. Osei." "Yes, sir." He sat for a while after Daewon left, and then he did something he had not planned to do, had in fact specifically told himself he would not do, because it was unnecessary and complicated and outside the clean lines he needed to maintain. He called Amara. "Are you working today?" he asked. "I start at 6, she said. "It's 5:30 now, so, yes." "Why?" "Suah wants to know if you got her letter." A pause. "She sent a letter?" Mrs. Shin photographed it. I have a feeling a physical copy was also dispatched through legitimate postal channels. It was 3 pages. It covered Nigeria's climate and recommendations for sock layering. She laughed. Genuine, warm, the same laugh that had surprised him the first time. "I haven't received a physical letter in years. I'll watch for it." "She called you a heart friend," he said. He said it carefully, as if the phrase was something that needed to be handled with care. That's something she says about people who matter. She got it from a book, I think, but she doesn't use it lightly. Silence on the line. Not uncomfortable, more like the kind of silence that exists between two people both figuring out what the current moment actually is. She's remarkable, Amara said finally. Genuinely. I've thought about her a lot. That day she handed me the tangerine through the gate, She stopped. Started again. I was having a hard day. Not like dramatically hard. Just the kind of hard that accumulates, 80 stops, heater not working, skipped lunch, one of those days where you feel sort of invisible. And then this small person appears and offers me a piece of fruit with complete seriousness, and I drove away and I cried a little bit. Good tears. The kind that remind you that people are actually okay. He listened to this. All of it. And then he said, I would like to repay you properly. Not with a food delivery. Actually properly. Would you... A pause that was not characteristic. Would you be willing to meet? With Sua. I think she would like that. Another pause from her end. She's 7 and she followed a delivery van, Amara said. I feel like the least I can do is show up. They met at a park on a Saturday. Jin-ho arrived in the plain dark coat rather than the good one. Sua wore a bright yellow jacket and ran ahead of him on the path and arrived in front of Amara like a small announcement. She had brought Amara a gift. A small book of Korean winter poems that she had selected herself at the bookstore with intense seriousness, checking multiple options, rejecting 2, finally presenting the chosen one to the cashier with the authority of someone who knows what they're doing. Amara received it with both hands, the Korean way, and Sua noticed, and her face did something extraordinary. They walked for a while. Sua talked. She talked about Biscuit the cat, the sock recommendation. She had brought a spare pair just in case. Her current thoughts on the unfairness of bedtime, the letter, she was pleased it had been noted, and the book of poems, one of which she recited from memory because she had read it enough times for it to stick. Jin-ho walked slightly behind them. Not removed. Just present. Differently. Watching. At one point, Amara looked back at him with an expression that asked, without words, if he was all right. He nodded. He was. He was, in fact, something more than all right, which he was not immediately sure what to do with. They stopped at a bench near the pond, and Sua, who had been building to something for the past 20 minutes, finally said, Amarashi, will you come for tea? At our house? On a proper day? Amara looked at Sua, and then at Jin-ho. I would like that, she said. She came the following Saturday. Mrs. Shin made the kind of spread that suggested preparations had begun at approximately dawn. Sua had made a sign for the front of the house that said, Welcome Heart Friend, in large, careful letters, which Amara photographed and would never delete. Biscuit inspected Amara with feline thoroughness and then sat on her feet, which Sua declared was a very good sign. Jin-ho was quieter than he'd been in the park. More contained. This was his space. And that did something to him, had rules associated with it that he was working out in real time. He made tea. He sat across from her at the kitchen table while Sua demonstrated 3 different cat handling techniques to Biscuit and conducted a running commentary. This isn't normal for us, he said, at a quiet moment when Sua had taken Biscuit to show him the garden. Having a guest? Amara said. He stopped. People outside of what I do. He said it simply, without elaborating, because he didn't need to and because he thought she was probably, on some level, aware. She looked at him across the table. I know a little bit, she said. About who you are. I'm not naive. She wrapped both hands around her tea. I'm also here because your daughter is one of the most genuinely good people I've ever met, and I don't say that because she's 7. I say it because goodness that real, in anyone, is rare. He looked at the table. He looked at her. She gets it from her mother, he said. Maybe, Amara said, but she's been raised by you, for 5 years without her mother. And she's who she is. She said it plainly, not as a compliment delivery, but as a statement of fact that she thought he should have access to. He was quiet for a long time. "I have not been a good person," he said eventually. The kind of sentence that costs something. "I don't know what you've been," she said. "I know what I've seen since that gate." Sua came back with biscuit and announced that the garden required an inspection, and the conversation moved on, and the afternoon settled into the comfortable shape of an afternoon that will be remembered by everyone present. Over the following months, things changed in ways that were not dramatic, and therefore more significant than dramatic things. Amara's contract with the delivery platform ended in February. She found logistics consulting work in March. A smaller company, a better fit, work that actually used her degree. She didn't call Jin-ho to tell him. She texted Sua, because Sua had given her a phone number card, hand-decorated, months ago. Sua's response was a string of exclamation points and a drawing of Amara at a desk with rays of light coming off her, which Amara printed and put on her refrigerator. Jin-ho found out through Sua, who told him over dinner. He said nothing, but that evening he looked up the company she'd started at, read their client portfolio, and thought about things he could not and would not do. He made no moves. He made no calls. He left her life clean. There were more Saturdays, more tea. A birthday, Sua's 8th, in the spring, at which Amara arrived with a present that Sua declared the best she'd received, in which was a kit for pressing flowers and a journal with blank pages for recording them. The journal had a note inside that said, "For all the heart friends you'll collect." Sua read it 3 times. Daewon watched all of this from a professional distance and said nothing, because it was not his business, and because, in 20 years of working for Kang Jin-ho, he had never once seen his employer look at anything the way he looked at the Saturday afternoons when a white delivery van, she drove a different car now, her own, a second-hand silver compact, appeared at the gate. Jin-ho himself was doing something he hadn't done in a long time, examining the structure of his own life. Not with the intention of dismantling it. That was not simple, was not fast, was not the work of a Saturday afternoon. But examining it, honestly. With the particular clarity that comes from having someone in your peripheral vision who exists entirely outside your usual world, and who, by existing there, makes the usual world look different than you've been seeing it. He made changes, slow ones, careful ones, the kind that don't make news. He had a conversation with the city council members that ended certain arrangements and established different ones. He restructured 2 of the holding companies in ways that moved them incrementally further from the underlying operations. He declined a partnership with a new network that would have expanded his reach, because expanding his reach was not what he wanted anymore, and he was finally being honest with himself about that. Daewon noticed all of it and said nothing, because Daewon was excellent at his job. And one evening in late spring, Jin-ho was sitting at the kitchen table after Sua had gone to bed, and Amara was across from him, and the tea was gone and neither of them had moved to leave, and he said, "I've been thinking about telling you something." She waited. "I've been moving away from things," he said. "For a while now. Not fast enough, not far enough, but moving." He looked at his hands. "I don't say this to explain myself or to ask for anything. I wanted you to know. Because honesty toward you feels like something I owe." She was quiet for a moment. "I know you can't just stop," she said. "I'm not asking you to. I know you're not." He looked at her. "But someone reminded me recently." And the edge of something that was not quite a smile appeared briefly. "That what I'm doing in here, how I'm raising this person, that counts. And that it's not nothing." She recognized her own words coming back to her. "I meant it," she said. "I know." He held her gaze. "That's why it mattered." Now here is the last layer of the story, the one that explains the title, the GPS moment, the 9 minutes of watching that dot. The crying. Jin-ho told Amara about it properly that evening. Not the version he'd given her on the phone, which was abbreviated and careful. The full version. What it had actually been like, sitting in the back of the car, watching his daughter's tracker move through streets, not knowing, imagining the worst iterations of what his world could do to someone he loved, running through every scenario he'd spent 20 years making sure would never happen, and then realizing that none of those scenarios were what was actually occurring. And what was actually occurring was that his 7-year-old daughter, who had her mother's heart and had somehow survived being raised by him, had followed a delivery van to give a kind stranger a hand warmer. Not because anyone told her to, not because she was trying to prove anything. Because she had looked through a gate at a person standing in the cold, and she had decided that person mattered, and she had done something about it. "I pulled over," he said. Daewon thought there was a security situation. I told him to give me a minute, and I sat there looking at the dot, which had stopped moving now because she'd found you, and I couldn't hold it together. He said it without apology. Not because I was scared, not anymore, because I realized she had found you, specifically. Out of everyone. In everything. She had navigated her world and found the one person I have since come to believe I was probably supposed to meet. A beat. Which is not a thing I usually say, because I don't usually believe things like that. Amara looked at him for a long time. "You cried?" she said. "I did. Because of the GPS. Because of all of it," he said. "The GPS. The tangerine, the letter, the hand warmer. The fact that she knows what a heart friend is and she chose one and she was right." He paused. "You're good for her. He stopped. Started differently. "You're good for me. In ways I didn't know I still needed." The kitchen was quiet. Outside, Biscuit was doing something minor and private in the garden. "I have 2 pairs of socks on," Amara said. He looked at her. "Sua's advice," she said. "I've been following it since November." And this time the thing that had almost been a smile became the real thing, and it was, in the way that some things are when they appear where you least expect them, quite extraordinary. Here is what happened after. The changes Jinho was making continued. They were slow and they were costly in ways that had nothing to do with money, and there were complications and setbacks and moments that required things of him that were not easy. He was not a man who transformed overnight. He was a man who had built something over 20 years, brick by careful brick, and the unbuilding of it was similarly methodical, similarly careful. Done in a way that maintained enough stability to protect the people inside the structure while it was gradually, sustainably, dismantled. It took time, more than a year, more than 2. Sua grew. She pressed flowers in the journal Amara had given her and filled 3 additional journals after it. She added Amara's name to the list of heart friends that she kept on a page near the back, a list that was by her 9th birthday, 22 names long, which her father thought said everything necessary about who she was and who she was becoming. Amara moved from the consulting job to a director role. She got a better apartment. She drove a better car, still silver, because she had decided she was a silver car person. She came to the house on Saturdays, and on Wednesdays she texted Sua goodnight because Sua had informed her this was a requirement, and she had agreed to the requirement without deliberation. And Jinho was learning. Slowly. The difficult practice of being a person who existed in the world in the ordinary way. Who ate dinner with people he cared about, rather than in back rooms with people he needed. Who read something other than threat assessments. Who allowed himself carefully and without ceremony to be part of something that was not built on fear. It was not perfect. It was not simple. It was the hardest thing he had done, including all of the things he was not going to tell you about and that you already understand without being told. But on a Saturday in the 2nd autumn after all of this began, in with the light going golden through the kitchen window and Sua in the garden, instructing Biscuit on the correct etiquette for visitors, and Amara across the table with her 2nd cup of tea and her 2 pairs of socks, and the book of winter poems that was now annotated in both their handwriting, he thought, not for the first time, and with increasing confidence, that whatever the GPS had told him that November afternoon, whatever the dot moving through those streets had meant, it had been, in the end, exactly right. His daughter had followed a stranger home, and in doing so, she had led him back to something he had not been able to find on his own. That is the whole story. All of it. A man who built his life on control, undone for 9 minutes by a GPS signal. A woman who stood in the cold at a gate and received a piece of fruit. A child who understood, before either of them did, that kindness given freely to strangers is not small. It is, sometimes, the thread that pulls everything else behind it. If you watch this to the end, you already know what it means. You've felt it, in whatever way your own life has taught you to feel things like this. The small moments that turn out to be enormous. The gates you stand at in the cold, not knowing someone is watching. The dots on the screen that move towards something that was already, where they were supposed to go. If this story reached something in you, subscribe. Not because you have to, because this channel exists for exactly these stories, the ones that don't let you go. And there are more of them. Every single week, there are more of them. We'll see you in the next one.